Fired and humiliated, the morning started like any other in the bustling heart of the city. Coffee in hand, I navigated the crowded sidewalks, earbuds in, catching up on emails. The sun glinted off the glass towers, promising opportunity and growth. But little did I know my life was about to pivot in a way I never could have imagined. I had been with Sutton Dynamics for years. Hard work, late nights, sacrificed weekends, all of it. I thought loyalty meant something. I thought effort was recognized. But as I would soon learn in Richard Sutton's world, loyalty was invisible and effort was disposable. The meeting invite arrived quietly in my inbox. 11 a.m., executive office. Short, cold, impersonal. But I convinced myself it was routine. A project review, perhaps a performance check-in. The idea that it could mean anything else never crossed my mind. When I walked into the boardroom, the air was different, thick, almost electric. Richard Sutton sat at the head of the table, his fingers steepled, eyes sharp, radiating that familiar smug confidence. 2 HR representatives flanked him. The envelope on the desk gleamed under the fluorescent lights like a warning sign. "Your position has been deemed redundant," he said, his voice clinical. Redundant. A word I had never associated with myself. The weight of the term crushed me. All the late nights, all the extra effort, all the sacrifices, reduced to one dismissive sentence. I tried to respond, tried to explain that my contributions mattered, but Richard leaned back, that same half-smile tugging at his lips, and simply said, "Business is business. You'll find the details in your severance package." The HR representatives recited the standard script about benefits, final paychecks, and returning company property. I could barely hear them. My mind replayed every accomplishment, every hour of sweat I had poured into the company. And I couldn't reconcile that reality with the cold dismissal in front of me. I stood there, box in hand, walking past colleagues who barely acknowledged me. Some looked away, others whispered. I wanted to scream, to confront him, to reclaim what was mine, but I didn't. I walked out silently, each step heavier than the last, the office doors closing behind me with finality. Outside, the city moved on as if nothing had happened. People rushed to work, coffee shops filled with chatter. Traffic honked impatiently, and I was just a man holding a cardboard box trying to process the abrupt collapse of a career I had poured my life into. But even in that moment of humiliation, a spark ignited. It wasn't anger or bitterness at first, it was clarity. Richard Sutton didn't define me. His dismissal didn't erase my skills, my ambition, or my ability to create. That envelope, that moment, was not an ending. It was a challenge. I realized something crucial that day. Life doesn't hand out justice. It doesn't reward loyalty or hard work in neat packages, but it does offer opportunity to rebuild, to strategize, to rise. And rising, I decided then, would be my mission. So I held on to that spark, carrying it quietly as I left the building, and I promised myself one thing. One day, the story wouldn't just be about me getting fired. It would be about me coming back stronger, smarter, and ready to claim what was rightfully mine. Not out of vengeance, but out of destiny. That morning, I learned that the hardest blows often contain the seeds of the greatest victories, and I was about to start planting them. The employee and the CEO, I wasn't born into privilege. No silver spoon, no Ivy League connections, no family network to fast-track my career. Everything I achieved I earned through grit, late nights, and relentless determination. That's why landing a job at Sutton Dynamics felt like striking gold. Not just a paycheck, it was validation. Proof that hard work could actually pay off. At first, I was the quiet guy in the back, showing up early and staying late, volunteering for the jobs nobody else wanted. Slowly, my work started to speak for me. Promotions followed. Recognition came. My cubicle gave way to a glass-walled office. I wasn't rich, not by any measure, but I was finally on the trajectory I had dreamed of. And then there was Richard Sutton, the CEO. On the surface, he was the epitome of success. Sharp suits, charismatic speeches, a commanding presence. But underneath that polished exterior was a man who treated people like chess pieces, disposable, interchangeable, replaceable. The first time he took notice of me, it wasn't for praise. It was for the way I didn't fit into his mold. I wasn't polished in the right circles. I didn't play golf with investors. I didn't sip $100 scotch at gala events. I came from a working-class background, and he made sure I never forgot it. "Not bad for a guy who didn't go to Harvard," he'd remark casually in meetings, undercutting my achievements with a thin smile. Still, I kept working, proving my worth. I covered for his mistakes, brought in major clients, stayed late, and weekend after weekend pushed forward. I thought naively that loyalty and hard work would earn respect, but respect wasn't part of Richard Sutton's vocabulary. Instead, I encountered subtle attacks in meetings, public humiliations, and a constant undermining of my abilities. Projects I had led were reassigned without explanation. Ideas I proposed were ignored until someone else presented them as their own. Slowly, the office atmosphere began to shift. I noticed it: missed invitations to meetings, snide remarks from colleagues, the cold distance of the man who once praised my potential. Still, I persisted, because in America, especially in the business world, there's this deeply ingrained belief: if you keep your head down, work hard, and prove your value, success will eventually recognize you. That belief carried me through countless long nights, and I clung to it desperately. Looking back, I see it clearly now. Every insult, every dismissive comment, every subtle slight was a warning. Richard Sutton didn't just see me as an employee, he saw me as a threat, someone who might rise beyond his control. And the higher I climbed, the sharper his attacks became. I thought I was building my career, but in reality, I was also building resilience. Every snub, every obstacle, every moment of frustration prepared me for something bigger. I was learning the hard way that power in the corporate world isn't given, it's seized. And those who underestimate their opponents often pay the highest price. By the time the warning signs became undeniable, it was too late to turn back. My rise had been noticed, my skills undeniable, but in Richard's eyes that made me expendable, and soon the storm I had ignored for so long would hit with full force. I didn't know it yet, but the moment of reckoning, the firing, the humiliation, the forced departure was coming, and while it would feel like the end, it would actually mark the beginning of the most pivotal chapter of my life, because sometimes the very people who try to destroy you are unknowingly setting the stage for your greatest victories. The fall, the firing scene. The morning it happened started like any other. I walked through the revolving doors of Sutton Dynamics, coffee in hand, trying to shake off the sleep still clinging to my eyes. The hum of printers and chatter of employees felt normal, routine even, but there was something in the air I couldn't place. Subtle glances, hushed conversations, the occasional awkward smile, it all added up to a silent warning I chose not to hear. By 10:45 a.m., the email arrived. Meeting at 11 Calm, Executive Office. The words were short, impersonal, and terrifying in their ambiguity. I tried to convince myself it was routine, a review, maybe a project discussion, but as the minutes ticked closer, an uneasy knot formed in my stomach. I walked down the familiar hallway, passing colleagues who looked at me with something between sympathy and fear. My assistant gave me a hesitant nod, her eyes saying more than she could voice. And then I was there, the executive boardroom, polished and intimidating as ever, with Richard Sutton at the head of the table, fingers steepled, his signature smirk playing across his face. 2 HR representatives flanked him, their expressions rehearsed, emotionless. Between us sat a manila envelope, innocuous yet lethal. I sat down, trying to steady my breathing. This was where the facade of corporate civility would crumble. Richard didn't waste a second. "Your position has been deemed redundant," he said, each word slicing through me with surgical precision. Redundant. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. Redundant. I had been the one driving growth, landing clients, solving crises nobody else could manage. How could I be redundant? I don't understand, I managed to stammer, my voice shaking despite my attempt to appear composed. Richard leaned back in his chair, that smug half-smile unwavering. "Business decisions are made every day. Your role is no longer necessary. You'll find the details in your severance package." The HR rep began their recitation of benefits, final paychecks, and the process for returning company property. Words blurred together, a haze of bureaucracy and cold efficiency. I barely heard a thing. My mind replayed every late night, every weekend, every crisis I had resolved, and it all felt meaningless, reduced to an envelope, reduced to a word, redundant. I looked around the boardroom, seeking some flicker of recognition, some acknowledgement of my contributions, anything human. There was none, just the sterile air of corporate procedure. The man who had once been my boss, my supposed mentor, was now a stranger who had orchestrated the obliteration of my career with the kind of ease that made my blood boil. I wanted to speak, to argue, to demand justice, but I knew it would accomplish nothing. Richard Sutton didn't operate on fairness, loyalty, or gratitude. He operated on control, and today he had wrested it from me with precision and cruelty. So I did what I had to do. I slid the chair back, picked up my things, and walked out. Each step through the office was heavier than the last. Colleagues avoided my gaze, whispered behind their hands, or simply looked away. My achievements, my efforts, my loyalty, all invisible, all gone. The elevator ride down felt endless. I gripped the cardboard box with my personal belongings, feeling a strange mixture of humiliation and disbelief. The doors opened, and I stepped out into the street. The city was moving as usual, people rushing to meetings, cars honking impatiently, the scent of fresh coffee and exhaust mingling in the air. The world didn't pause, life didn't wait, and I felt utterly alone. But even as the sting of humiliation burned, a small ember ignited inside me. It wasn't vengeance yet. It wasn't even anger, just clarity. Richard Sutton had taken my job, but he hadn't taken my skills, my ambition, or my drive. That manila envelope wasn't the end. It was a challenge, a call to action. In that moment, I made a silent vow. This wouldn't define me. If Sutton Dynamics had discarded me, I would prove in the most undeniable way possible that they had made a mistake. The fire that had been dormant through years of loyalty and hard work finally sparked into life. And as I walked through the streets of the city, carrying nothing but a box and my determination, I realized that sometimes the harshest blows plant the seeds for the greatest comebacks. This was not the end of my story. It was only the beginning, the rebirth, starting over. The first few weeks after the firing were brutal. I woke up each morning staring at the ceiling, coffee in hand, feeling the weight of failure pressing down. For years my identity had been tied to Sutton Dynamics, to that office, those projects, the buzz of my phone, and the rush of deadlines. And suddenly, it was gone. No emails to answer, no meetings to run, no validation from a man who had made my life feel disposable. Humiliation clung to me like a second skin. Friends asked how I was holding up. Family offered platitudes and reassurances. But the truth? I felt like a ghost wandering through my own life. I replayed that moment in the boardroom over and over. The envelope, Richard's smug smile, the whispered acknowledgements of colleagues. Nights were the hardest. Lying in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, my mind ran every scenario, every regret, every moment I thought I could have done something differently. Then, somewhere in that despair, something shifted. One morning, as I nursed my cold coffee, I realized Richard Sutton had already taken enough from me, my pride, my job, my stability. If I allowed him to take my future as well, then he truly would have won. And I refused to let that happen. I had no trust fund, no powerful connections waiting to offer a lifeline, but I had experience, grit, and an intimate understanding of what made businesses thrive or fail. I decided to bet on the only person I could trust, myself. The first step was messy. I sold my car to raise some capital. I maxed out credit cards. I rented a tiny office above a laundromat, where the smell of detergent mixed with the faint hum of dryers. My desk was second-hand, my computer barely functional, and my conference room was a fold-out table in the corner. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I started small, offering consulting to companies that couldn't afford the big firms. I knew how to streamline operations, secure clients, and build loyalty. Slowly, word spread. One referral led to a small project, which led to another. Nothing flashy, nothing instant, just steady progress. Every success was a brick, and brick by brick I was reconstructing my life. There were days I questioned myself, nights when the bills piled up faster than the revenue coming in, moments when quitting seemed easier than continuing. But each time I considered giving up, I remembered Richard's words. "Your position has been deemed redundant." Those words, intended to wound, became my fuel. If he thought I was replaceable, I would prove him spectacularly wrong. Within months, things began to change. A mid-sized manufacturing client brought me on board. Soon after, a regional chain. Then, almost unbelievably, a national client. Money started flowing in. Enough to leave the laundromat office, enough to hire a small team, enough to know that I wasn't just surviving, I was building. I was learning something crucial along the way. Success isn't just about intelligence or strategy. It's about resilience. It's about showing up even when your body is exhausted, your bank account is empty, and the world seems indifferent. It's about making small, consistent choices that lead to big outcomes over time. Looking back, being fired was the best thing that ever happened to me. If Richard had never shoved me out the door, I never would have had the courage or the necessity to walk through my own path, to create something independently, to prove my capabilities on my own terms. That pink slip wasn't an ending. It was the spark for a new beginning. By the end of that first year, my small consultancy had grown into a recognized firm. We weren't a Fortune 500 company, but we had credibility, respect, and a portfolio of success. I had regained confidence, not just in my career, but in my ability to overcome adversity, adapt, and thrive. I realized that the journey had changed me. I wasn't just an employee anymore. I wasn't defined by someone else's perception of my worth. I had become a leader, a strategist, a creator of opportunity, and deep down I knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge, the one that would test every lesson I had learned, was still ahead, because the fire Richard Sutton had lit inside me on that humiliating day would eventually lead me back, not as the dismissed employee, but as the one in control. The turning point. First big success. Momentum is a strange thing. One day you feel like you're pushing a boulder uphill, and the next it's rolling faster than you ever imagined. For months, my small consultancy had been scraping by, taking whatever projects came our way, and learning every lesson the hard way. But the turning point, the moment that changed everything, arrived in the form of Harrison Manufacturing, a struggling Midwestern company on the verge of collapse. When I first walked into their plant, I was greeted by the unmistakable scent of rust and dust, the hum of outdated machines, and the wary eyes of employees who had been beaten down by years of mismanagement. Their morale was low, their systems were failing, and their leadership non-existent. It was, in every sense, a disaster waiting to be turned around. But I didn't see hopelessness. I saw potential. I saw a challenge I could conquer. I pitched them boldly: cost reductions, efficiency improvements, and a turnaround plan that could revive the company in 18 months. Not 5 years, not 3, but 18 months. They were skeptical, of course. Who wouldn't be? A small consultancy with barely a track record promising to rescue a sinking ship? But desperation can be persuasive, and they signed on. The first months were grueling. I worked 18-hour days, sleeping in a cheap motel nearby, running numbers until my eyes blurred. I walked every inch of the factory floor, talking to employees who hadn't been heard in years, analyzing every machine, every process, every failing system. Every improvement felt like a victory, no matter how small. And slowly, like the turning of a massive gear, the machine of Harrison Manufacturing began to move. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, the first positive results. Orders started to stabilize, production errors decreased, costs dropped. It wasn't a huge turnaround yet, but it was enough to prove that the plan worked. The relief in the eyes of the employees was priceless. They started to believe again, and when employees believe, transformation accelerates. Word spread quickly. My phone rang constantly. Other companies wanted my help. I realized that success wasn't just about money. It was about credibility, reputation, and trust. Harrison Manufacturing was my first real proof that I could not only survive after being fired, but thrive on my own terms. Within months, my consultancy grew from a handful of employees to a 30-person team. We took on regional clients, then national ones, and suddenly the small firm above the laundromat was a recognizable player in the market. I had learned a crucial lesson. Small wins build momentum, and momentum fuels opportunity. But there was more than just business growth happening. I was building confidence, my own and that of the people around me. I learned to make decisions quickly, to inspire teams, and to navigate the chaos of a failing business with a steady hand. Leadership wasn't about titles, it was about action, resilience, and vision. And yet, beneath every success, a quiet fire still burned. Richard Sutton's face would occasionally flash in my mind. Smug, dismissive, certain I was irrelevant. That fire wasn't bitterness, it was clarity. He had underestimated me, and that underestimation had given me motivation I could never have conjured on my own. Every client I landed, every project I salvaged, every employee I inspired was proof that the man who called me redundant had been profoundly wrong. By the end of that year, Harrison Manufacturing had posted its first profit in over a decade. My consultancy wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. I had transformed a failing company into a success story, and in doing so I had transformed myself. I was no longer the employee who had been cast aside. I was the architect of growth, the driver of change, and a force to be reckoned with. Looking back, that first big success was more than a turning point for my business. It was a turning point for me personally. It taught me that setbacks are temporary, resilience is essential, and vision is everything. And most importantly, it revealed that the story didn't end when I was fired. It was only beginning, and the chapters ahead would be even more dramatic. Because while I had won this battle, the war, the opportunity to reclaim what had been taken from me, was still on the horizon, and I was ready. Sutton Dynamics in trouble. Even from a distance, the cracks in Sutton Dynamics were impossible to ignore. Industry news, trade magazines, and LinkedIn updates became my secret pleasure. I followed the company I had once called home with a mix of fascination and strategic curiosity. The empire that had discarded me was faltering, and every headline felt like a piece of a puzzle I was quietly assembling. It started subtly, rumors of layoffs, client dissatisfaction, delayed projects. At first I didn't pay too much attention. Businesses have ups and downs, I told myself. But the more I watched, the more undeniable the signs became. Major clients began pulling contracts, citing mismanagement and slow responses. Vendors complained about overdue payments. Employees whispered about burnout and morale collapse. Even the press, usually dazzled by Richard Sutton's charisma, began reporting critical stories about missteps and poor leadership. I knew Richard well enough to see why it was happening. He had built the company on charm and short-term wins rather than solid processes and sustainable systems. Talent had been undervalued, strategy had been reactive, and pride had blinded him to reality. And now, the very empire he had cultivated with swagger and bravado was crumbling under its own weight. Late one evening, I found myself poring over Sutton Dynamics' quarterly financials. Revenue had dropped nearly 20% year over year. Expenses were ballooning, debt was mounting, and the company's biggest competitor was aggressively courting top clients. The brand that had once seemed untouchable was now vulnerable, exposed to anyone bold enough to seize the opportunity. A strange satisfaction tinged my analysis, not gloating, not revenge, but recognition. I had been dismissed as replaceable, yet here I was, running a growing company and witnessing firsthand the vulnerabilities of the organization that had underestimated me. I could almost see the pieces falling into place. I began speaking with former employees, industry insiders, and potential investors. Patterns emerged. Leadership was indecisive, strategy was reactive, morale was broken. There was a gap, a window, where someone with vision, decisiveness, and execution could step in and reverse the decline. That someone, I realized with a quiet thrill, could very well be me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The man who had fired me with such casual dismissal had inadvertently created the circumstances that made my comeback not only possible, but inevitable. I had built my company from the ground up, learned the hard lessons of leadership, resilience, and strategic thinking, and now the very structure Richard Sutton had left behind was fragile, ready for transformation. I started modeling scenarios for acquisition, thinking through numbers, potential obstacles, and negotiation strategies. My team at my consultancy was intrigued but cautious. "You're serious about buying Sutton Dynamics?" my CFO asked one evening. I nodded. "It's risky," he said, "but I see the logic." Indeed, the risk was immense, financially, strategically, and emotionally. But I had spent months preparing for this. I wasn't rushing, I was calculating. I realized that timing was everything. Entering too early could backfire. Waiting too long could mean missing the opportunity entirely. I needed to understand the weaknesses, the gaps, and the internal chaos, and I needed to prepare my strategy meticulously. This wasn't just a business move, it was the culmination of years of preparation, resilience, and relentless focus. I began reaching out discreetly to potential partners, setting the stage for a negotiation that would require patience, diplomacy, and leverage. The company was bleeding clients, employees were demoralized, and the board was restless. Richard, who had once seemed invincible, was now defensive, reactive, and increasingly isolated. Pride had become his downfall, and I watched, quietly, confidently. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't plotting public humiliation. I was preparing to turn the situation into a strategic victory, one built on competence, vision, and timing. The opportunity was clear. Sutton Dynamics could survive, even thrive, but only under the right leadership, and that leadership could very well be mine. For the first time in years, I felt a thrill that had nothing to do with survival or recovery. This was about strategy, vision, and execution on a level I had been preparing for since the day I was fired. The empire that once dismissed me was now vulnerable, and I was ready to step in, not as a former employee, but as the orchestrator of its next chapter. The stage was set. Sutton Dynamics was crumbling, but opportunity never waits for the timid, and I was not timid. The acquisition, negotiations, and triumph. The day I finally made the move to acquire Sutton Dynamics felt surreal. Months of careful planning, financial modeling, and discreet conversations had led to this moment. I sat in my office, reviewing the final numbers for what felt like the 100th time, anticipating objections, hidden clauses, and potential pitfalls. But beneath the spreadsheets and projections, there was something else, an electric sense of destiny. The negotiation room was exactly as I remembered from my last day at Sutton Dynamics: polished oak, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the faint scent of arrogance lingering in the air. Richard Sutton was there, looking older, a bit more worn, but still radiating the confidence that had cost him his empire. Across from him, I placed my briefcase with the proposal, every document meticulously organized, every number accounted for. "Mr. Miller," Richard began, his voice smooth but guarded, "I hear you've been doing quite well." There was incredulity in his tone, as if the idea of me having the audacity or the ability to buy his company was laughable. I leaned forward. "I've been fortunate, Richard, and I've learned a lot about turning struggling companies around. Sutton Dynamics has potential, but it needs new leadership, someone willing to make the tough decisions you avoided." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked by a practiced smile. The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same man who once dismissed me as redundant, and now here he was, forced to listen to me dictate terms. Negotiations were intense. Every clause was scrutinized, every liability debated. His team tried to push back, leveraging any advantage they could, but I had anticipated every move. I knew the company's weak spots, its debts, and its desperate need for restructuring. Most importantly, I had the vision and credibility to execute a turnaround, proof from the successes I had already achieved with my own firm. Hours passed. Tensions rose. I could see Richard's face tighten, his ego warring with practicality. And then came the moment of truth, the final offer. I presented the number, fair but firm, a number reflecting the company's value, its potential, and the price of lost opportunities. Richard stared at it. His silence was heavy. I could feel the weight of history between us, the years I had poured into his company, the humiliation of my firing, the countless late nights building my own path. And yet, I remained calm. I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. I let the facts speak for themselves. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "It's acceptable." The room exhaled collectively. Papers were signed, pens clicked, and just like that, Sutton Dynamics officially became mine. I had walked back into the empire that had tossed me aside, and I was now in control. The irony was delicious, but the true victory was deeper than that. It wasn't about money or status. It was about proving to myself that resilience, strategy, and persistence could overcome even the harshest betrayals. As I stepped out of that boardroom, I looked at the skyline through the tall windows. The city stretched before me, full of opportunity and challenge. I wasn't just the owner of a company. I was the author of my own story. The past, the firing, the humiliation, the doubt had all been necessary chapters leading to this triumph. Richard Sutton left the room quietly. No fanfare, no protest. I could see in his eyes that he understood the full weight of what had just happened. For the first time, he might have realized that the person he once dismissed as replaceable had become indispensable, not just to a business, but to the legacy of the company itself. This was the culmination of years of struggle, grit, and relentless determination. The ultimate proof that sometimes life's harshest setbacks are just the beginning of the most extraordinary comebacks. And as I walked down the hall, keys to the company in hand, I smiled. The story wasn't over. It was just entering its most exciting chapter, the challenge of leadership. Owning Sutton Dynamics was nothing like I had imagined. Walking into the office as the new CEO, I expected admiration, respect, perhaps even a sense of relief from employees who had been under Richard's rigid, often erratic leadership. What I encountered was far more complex: skepticism, resentment, and a deeply ingrained culture resistant to change. The first challenge was trust. Years of mismanagement had left employees wary, cautious, and reluctant to embrace new ideas. Some whispered behind my back, questioning my experience despite my successes with my consultancy. Others openly challenged my directives, testing my resolve at every step. I realized immediately that leadership wasn't about authority. It was about earning confidence, one decision, one conversation, one visible action at a time. I started small. Town hall meetings, open-door policies, and listening sessions became my tools. I didn't have all the answers, and I made sure employees knew it, but I promised transparency, consistency, and fairness. Slowly, the walls began to crack. People who had been invisible for years started speaking up. Ideas surfaced, problems were addressed proactively, and a sense of collaboration began to take root. Next came structural change. Certain dynamics had been running on outdated systems, inefficient workflows, and vague hierarchies. Decisions had been made haphazardly, and accountability was nearly non-existent. I had to restructure departments, redefine roles, and implement processes that would ensure clarity and efficiency. It wasn't popular at first. Many resisted, fearing the unknown or reluctant to give up old habits. But I had learned long ago that leadership required making tough decisions, even when they were uncomfortable. The financial side was another hurdle. Richard's legacy included hidden liabilities, poorly negotiated contracts, and overextended budgets. I spent long nights reviewing ledgers, renegotiating deals, and streamlining operations. Every improvement was met with resistance, skepticism, or outright doubt. Yet I knew that transformation required patience and precision. Every small victory, paying down debt, increasing cash flow, winning back clients, was a building block for long-term success. Perhaps the most personal challenge was managing my own expectations and emotions. Owning a company I had once been fired from was emotionally charged. There were moments of satisfaction, yes, but also moments of frustration. Watching mistakes I had once anticipated being repeated, seeing employees cling to old habits, or negotiating with resistant board members tested my resolve daily. Leadership demanded not only strategy, but emotional intelligence, self-control, empathy, and the ability to remain focused on the bigger picture. Over time, I began to see culture shift. Meetings became collaborative rather than combative. Projects were executed efficiently, with accountability built in. Employees started taking pride in their work again. The company no longer functioned as a reactive machine, but as a proactive, driven organization. The same people who had doubted me now looked to me for guidance, ideas, and leadership. And yet, I never lost sight of the lessons that had brought me here. Richard Sutton's mistakes had taught me the importance of humility, listening, and calculated risk. My years rebuilding my consultancy had taught me resilience, patience, and strategic vision. Combining these lessons allowed me to navigate the complex landscape of leadership with confidence, even when challenges seemed insurmountable. I also realized that leadership was about inspiring the next generation. Mentorship became a priority, training programs were instituted, talent was nurtured rather than exploited. I wanted Sutton Dynamics to be a place where employees could grow, contribute meaningfully, and feel valued, a stark contrast to the environment Richard had cultivated. By the end of the first year under my leadership, the transformation was tangible. Efficiency was up, profits were stabilizing, and employee satisfaction had noticeably improved. Clients expressed renewed confidence in the company. Sutton Dynamics wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, guided by vision, persistence, and a newfound culture of accountability and collaboration. Stepping back and observing the changes, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Not because I had bought the company or achieved a personal victory over Richard, but because I had created an organization that could endure, innovate, and inspire. Leadership was no longer a theoretical concept for me. It was a lived reality, a daily practice, and a testament to the lessons learned from every setback, failure, and challenge I had faced. Owning Sutton Dynamics had been the ultimate goal, but leading it successfully was the real triumph. And as I looked out over the city skyline from my office, I understood this. True leadership isn't about titles, power, or revenge. It's about vision, responsibility, and the ability to transform not only a company, but the people within it. Reflection and lessons learned. Sitting in my office, years after the acquisition, I often found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. The path from being fired to owning Sutton Dynamics had been anything but linear, filled with uncertainty, setbacks, and moments that tested the limits of patience, courage, and resilience. Yet, every challenge had been a lesson, every failure a stepping stone toward growth. The first lesson was resilience. Losing my job felt like the end of the world at the time, a personal humiliation that cut deep. But resilience isn't about avoiding pain or setbacks. It's about responding to them with clarity and determination. I learned to embrace discomfort, to convert anger and disappointment into motivation, and to focus on solutions rather than grievances. The fire that Richard Sutton had ignited through his dismissal became the fuel for my comeback, a reminder that adversity is often the catalyst for growth. Next came the value of vision. In those early weeks and months, I realized that having skills or knowledge wasn't enough. Success required seeing beyond immediate problems, anticipating opportunities, and crafting a strategy to navigate uncertainty. My consultancy, Harrison Manufacturing, and ultimately Sutton Dynamics, all demanded foresight and planning. Vision isn't just a concept, it's actionable, practical, and requires constant refinement. Another critical lesson was the importance of leadership over authority. Richard Sutton wielded authority, but lacked true leadership. He could command respect, but he didn't inspire loyalty, collaboration, or innovation. True leadership comes from earning trust, empowering others, and making difficult decisions that prioritize long-term success over short-term comfort. I had to learn to listen, to observe, and to act decisively, all while maintaining empathy and humility. Patience and timing also proved indispensable. The acquisition of Sutton Dynamics wasn't impulsive. It required months of observation, careful analysis, and calculated risk. Acting too soon or too late could have destroyed the opportunity entirely. I learned that timing is as much a strategic asset as capital or skill. Recognizing the right moment and having the discipline to wait for it is what separates reactive individuals from visionary leaders. Financial prudence and strategic risk-taking were intertwined lessons. I had to risk capital, reputation, and time to rebuild and grow my consultancy, yet every risk was informed by meticulous research, scenario planning, and contingency strategies. Success came not from blind daring, but from calculated boldness, balancing opportunity against potential consequence. The journey also reinforced the power of relationships and mentorship. Early in my career, I had underestimated the value of guidance and collaboration. As a business owner and leader, I learned to listen to advice, invest in talent, and create environments where people could thrive. Those relationships not only strengthened the company, but also reinforced the principle that success is rarely achieved in isolation. Perhaps most profoundly, I learned that humiliation and failure are not endpoints. They are lessons. Being fired was devastating, but it forced me to examine my own strengths, weaknesses, and ambitions. It pushed me to step outside my comfort zone, build my own company, and ultimately claim the opportunity that had been denied to me. Life doesn't always offer second chances, but it does offer opportunities for reinvention if you have the courage to seize them. Looking back, I realized the story isn't about revenge or vindication, it's about transformation. The fire of dismissal became a forge, shaping resilience, strategy, and vision. The failures along the way became teachers, guiding decisions and fortifying resolve. The eventual acquisition of Sutton Dynamics was not just a victory, it was a culmination of lessons internalized through years of struggle, learning, and growth. And perhaps the final lesson, the one that resonates most, is the power of perspective. The man who fired me believed he had ended my journey. In reality, he had set the stage for my greatest achievement. Life's obstacles often appear insurmountable in the moment, but with patience, strategy, and resilience, they can become stepping stones to opportunities far greater than we imagine. As I watched my employees innovate, collaborate, and grow, I felt a quiet satisfaction. I hadn't just rebuilt a company, I had rebuilt myself. Every challenge, every late night, every setback had led to this moment. Sutton Dynamics had become a symbol of transformation, not just for the business, but for the person who once thought the world had closed its doors. This reflection is a reminder that setbacks are temporary, vision is vital, and persistence pays. And while the story of being fired might have begun in humiliation, it ultimately led to triumph, growth, and the profound understanding that our greatest victories often rise from our most painful defeats. The final victory, legacy and beyond. Sitting in my office at Sutton Dynamics, Watching the city skyline stretch beyond the windows, I felt a sense of completeness I hadn't known existed. The journey from being fired to reclaiming and transforming the company had been long, arduous, and at times almost unbearable. But every trial, every sleepless night, every moment of doubt had led to this. Not just personal triumph, but a legacy in the making. The company I now led was more than a business. It was a symbol of resilience, vision, and transformation. Departments that had once been stagnant were innovating, employees were empowered, and our clients recognized Sutton Dynamics as a leader once again. But beyond the numbers, the profits, and the accolades, the true victory was cultural. I had built an organization where people felt valued, where ideas were heard, and where challenges were met with collaboration rather than fear. Reflecting on the journey, I realized that the firing, the humiliation, the doubt, the rejection had been essential. Without it, I may have never discovered my own capabilities, my vision, or my determination. That moment of dismissal, intended to destroy me, had paradoxically become the catalyst for the most significant achievements of my life. Life has a way of setting the stage for the outcomes we can't yet imagine, and mine had unfolded exactly as it should. Legacy, I learned, isn't about revenge. It's about impact. It's about the people you inspire, the structures you leave behind, and the ripple effects of the decisions you make. I wanted Sutton Dynamics to stand not just as a successful company, but as a testament to what leadership can accomplish when grounded in integrity, resilience, and vision. I wanted employees to feel pride in their work, clients to trust our brand implicitly, and the industry to recognize the strength of transformation executed with purpose. In many ways, my victory was personal as well. Richard Sutton had underestimated me, dismissed me, and perhaps thought my story had ended the day he handed me that envelope, but the truth was far from it. I had turned his rejection into fuel, his arrogance into a lesson, and his oversight into an opportunity. Owning the company wasn't just a business move, it was proof that strategy, patience, and relentless determination could convert adversity into triumph. I also understood that the story doesn't truly end with acquisition or profit. The final victory lies in the ongoing ability to adapt, innovate, and nurture those around you. Leadership is not static. It's a continuous journey of learning, listening, and evolving. Even now, I faced challenges, market shifts, new competitors, and internal dynamics that required constant attention. But these challenges no longer intimidated me. They energized me. They reminded me that true success is built on perpetual growth and the courage to embrace change. Looking back, there were three truths I carried with me from start to finish. First, setbacks are not endings. They are lessons and opportunities in disguise. Second, leadership is earned through action, empathy, and vision, not granted by title or authority. Third, persistence and calculated risk are the keys to turning adversity into lasting success. These principles had guided me from the moment I was fired to this very day, shaping not just my company but the person I had become. There was also a subtle satisfaction in knowing that the journey had come full circle. The company that once defined me and dismissed me had become a platform for my vision, leadership, and impact. I had transformed it, and in doing so, I had transformed myself. I had taken control of my narrative, proving that personal agency, resilience, and strategic thinking can overturn even the most daunting circumstances. As I prepared for the next chapter, expansion, innovation, and continued growth, I felt a quiet confidence. The story that began with loss, humiliation, and doubt had evolved into one of triumph, legacy, and empowerment, and perhaps the most important victory of all was internal. I no longer feared failure, nor did I allow the judgments of others to define my worth. I had reclaimed my life, my career, and my purpose. Sutton Dynamics would continue to grow, but so would I, always learning, always leading, always pushing forward. The final victory wasn't just ownership or profit. It was the proof that even when life turns against you, persistence, vision, and courage can create an extraordinary legacy. And as I looked out across the city, reflecting on every setback and triumph, I smiled. The journey had been long, the lessons hard, but the story had reached a conclusion that was more than I had ever imagined. From redundancy to leadership, from dismissal to legacy, the journey had proven one undeniable truth. True victory comes not from avoiding challenges, but from facing them head-on and emerging stronger on the other side. Beyond the victory years later, I often walk through the halls of Sutton Dynamics and pause for a moment, taking in the energy, the innovation, the hum of a company that was once on the brink of collapse. It's hard to believe that this thriving organization, full of purpose and pride, began as a place where I was dismissed, discarded, and underestimated. That pink slip, the moment meant to end my story, had instead redirected it towards something far greater. In quiet reflection, I realized that the journey wasn't just about reclaiming a company. It was about reclaiming myself. The fire that had burned within me after being fired became a force that shaped my resilience, sharpened my vision, and defined my leadership. Every late night, every calculated risk, every small victory along the way had built the foundation for this moment. I think often about Richard Sutton, the man who once held my career in his hands. He was not a villain in the story. He was a catalyst. His misjudgment forced me to confront my own potential, to forge a path that I may never have walked otherwise. Life has a strange way of turning obstacles into opportunities, and his actions, intentional or not, were a turning point that changed everything. Looking back, the lessons are clear. Leadership is more than authority. It's about inspiring others, making tough decisions, and navigating uncertainty with confidence and integrity. Setbacks are not failures. They are opportunities to learn, grow, and adapt. Vision, persistence, and courage can transform the most daunting challenges into extraordinary victories. Sutton Dynamics is now more than a business. It's a legacy, not because of the profit it generates or the contracts it secures, but because of the people it empowers, the culture it nurtures, and the story it tells. That resilience can outshine defeat, and determination can turn dismissal into triumph. And yet, the story doesn't end here. The lessons learned, the strategies honed, and the growth achieved continue to shape every decision, every expansion, every new opportunity. The journey from redundancy to leadership, from rejection to legacy, remains a guiding force, reminding me that even when life closes doors, there is always a path forward for those willing to see it and walk it. As I leave my office at the end of a long day, I often pause at the window and look out at the city lights. They remind me that opportunity is everywhere, and victory is not just about what you achieve, but about how you rise, time and again, from every fall. Because in the end, true success isn't about reclaiming what was lost. It's about creating something greater than anyone, including yourself, ever imagined. So, what did you think of this incredible journey? On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate it? Share your score and thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious to see your reaction. And if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel now. You don't want to miss the next unbelievable story of triumph, resilience, and shocking twists. Hit the bell so you're the first to watch when the next chapter drops.